We're live.
Hello,
everyone. Awesome.
Welcome, and we have Chris Sainty on.
Hey, yes. How are you doing?
We just happen to have Chris Sainty on. You know, no big deal. Just the coolest person ever. Nothing to it. Awesome. Welcome to the February edition. That's a difficult word for me to pronounce. February edition of the Blazor Community Stand-Up. As John mentioned, we've got Chris on. He's going to be talking to us a little bit later all about Blazor, giving us a walkthrough of all of the different projects under that ecosystem. But as per usual, we're going to kick off today's community stand-up with some introductions and some community links. So hello, if you are new here or if you're a veteran of these community stand-ups, my name is Safia. I'm a software engineer at Microsoft working on Blazor. I am joined by my wonderful compatriot, John.
Hello. Yep, I'm John. I'm a PM on the .NET community team. So I kind of help start some of these community stand-ups and do some other stuff and have some fun and get to hang out with the community folks.
Yep. John is one of the people who made this whole Blazor specific community stand-up possible. So thanks, John, for bringing Blazor to the world. And we always like to have a guest on or guests on for this. And today we've got Chris, as mentioned, who we will talk to a little bit later about Blazor. We're going to give him the mic and the screen share so he can share all the wonderful things with us. For now, I'm going to share my screen and talk a little bit about some of the fun links that I've been seeing over on the internet. Cool. All right. So I've gathered up a fun little collection of links for the folks here. And if you are curious to see what these links are, we will be showing them right on screen if you want to click through. So the first two links that I wanted to share were all about component systems that are coming out in Blazor. About 2 streams ago, we had the co-creators of Material Blazor on the show to talk about their component library, demo it in some applications, and show us how it's used. There's actually a ton of component libraries that are available for Blazor. So if you are not a fan of Material or you just want your application to have another look, there are options that are available to you. So there's 2 ones that I want to share today. The first is called Ant Blazor. This is actually based off the Ant Design kind of component ecosystem. There's an implementation in React you might be familiar with that's quite popular. And there is also one in Blazor. What's really interesting is last week they released version 0.6.0 of their package. So congrats to them on a major release. It's always fun to ship software out to people. Their documentation page is really great. You can take a look through it, browse some of the components they have, as well as take a peek at their getting started documentation for that library, browse their supportability, all of that good stuff. Let us know in the,
One really cool thing too about their docs, which is kind of rare in open source stuff, is it also has Chinese versions. So everything is, there's the whole Chinese version of everything. So, yep, for any friends that are watching that are more comfortable with Chinese, that's a neat thing to know about.
Fun switching.
Yep.
And we kind of brought this up actually during the last stream about it's really awesome to see translations of Blazor related content in different languages. Last time we were talking about Japanese translations. We've got Chinese translations here. So it's a great way to contribute to the community, make sure that there's stuff available in people's primary language. In addition to Ant Design, we've got Blazordy. I think I said that right, Blazordy, which is a Blazor-based implementation of Clarity, which is a VMware-based component library. What I really like about this is it's so clean and crisp. They've got some amazing tables, if I can find them here, data lists, there we go, that you can use in your application. They are not open source yet, although it will be soon. I think I was reading through some of the comments made by the creators on social, and it's expected to go open source in just a couple of months. But this is such a crisp component library. If you've ever wanted to use like a data grid or something like that in your Blazor app, this is something that you can check out. And again, we've like covered 3 design systems now over the past couple of stand-ups. So there's lots of flexibility for you to build expressive and beautiful UIs in Blazor using stuff that the community has built. So that's always great to see. And looking forward to Blazor already going open source. Awesome. The third link I wanted to share is actually Blazor adjacent. If you are a fan of any of the streams that we do over here on .NET Live, you might be familiar with this. And if you've checked out some of our previous streams, you might also be familiar with the ongoing work to improve the Razor editor in Visual Studio. I personally know the engineers that have been working on this. They're extremely intelligent and dedicated people, so it's really great to see the stuff that they've been working on go out into the world. You can actually try this out in the latest versions of Visual Studio. So if you grab Visual Studio 69, either one of the previews or it'll be out soon, you can navigate and enable the new Razor editor and check out some of the functionality there. There's tons of improvements to formatting and code actions, lots of performance improvements as well. And this is not strictly Blazor related, but if you're a Blazor developer, you've probably used Razor. So there's tooling improvements in the ecosystem here that you should check out. And try it out, share your feedback with the team. Let us know how we can improve it or how it's helped you. If you think this is way better than what we had before, that's also great to share.
And those surveys that are, I think they're linked down at the bottom there, those are really important to do. So as you go through and take a look, there's the give feedback and there've been some those surveys right there.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, there's a survey on, oh, it's closed. Might be too late for that.
What about this?
How about this one? This one might be open. Oh, that one is also closed.
No,
okay, I'm sorry. It's too late to share your opinions on syntax highlighting. But hopefully this blog post is from about 2 weeks ago. Hopefully you had the chance to share your insights on syntax coloring in Razor. I think I filled out this form, so maybe my opinion is the only one that matters.
I'll fill that. I'll fill that.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Chris and I's opinions are the only ones that matter. But there's lots of opportunities like this for you to give feedback on things you want to see changed or problems you want to report, especially when we ship out something new. So cool to see here. Awesome. What else is there to share? So in last month stand up, I talked a little bit about how one of the things I try to share is share community articles on topics that we tend to see a lot of issues or questions about in the ASP.NET Core repo as the team is triaging issues. And one of the things that we definitely do get a fair amount of questions about is CSS isolation. This is a new feature that was shipped in .NET 5. People have been using it because it's been much requested. And of course, there's a tendency to want to figure out how to do certain things or apply certain patterns, leveraging CSS isolation in Blazor. So this is an article by Dave Brock. If that name sounds familiar to you, it's actually because we highlighted him a couple of months ago as a community spotlight because he actually wrote the documentation article on docs.microsoft.com for CSS isolation. And he's published a couple of articles about it right now. This one in particular is about passing down styles in CSS in Blazor applications that leverage CSS isolation. So you're getting some awesome content from the person who wrote our docs. And I think this is really great to share. Check it out if you've ever had a question about how it works or you've been wanting to use CSS isolation in a couple of more advanced scenarios. This is a great piece of content to check out. Cool. All right, I'm gonna skip to this post. All right, so if you've been using Blazor WebAssembly, you might be familiar with the fact that you can actually deploy, or Blazor WebAssembly is a single page application. You can do things like deploy it to GitHub pages or deploy it to Azure Static sites, but that's not the only place that you can deploy Blazor WebAssembly applications to. Netlify is another service that you can deploy those apps to. I've said the word deploy a lot in the past couple of sentences. But this is an article by a community member that I thought was really great. If you've ever wondered, hey, I want to host my Blazor WebAssembly application. I've got lots of different options that are available to me. I want to try out this Netlify thing. This kind of breaks down everything you need to do to get your Blazor WebAssembly application on GitHub and then set up automatic deploys whenever you push to GitHub for your WASM app. So all this is documented here. This is a great reference to bookmark if you've ever wanted to try and figure this out and get yourself set up with a fancy Blazor app on the web. Good stuff.
It's good time. Oops, sorry. That's a different question. This one just came in asking about right when you were showing this link, asking how do I deploy. So and there are good docs. I'll share that in the chat. But you can deploy in several different ways. You can do a server side. You can do hosted in a .NET app, and you can just deploy completely out to a static application anywhere that'll serve a static site. So.
Yeah, there's tons of different options, and you're right, John. We've got docs on this that kind of talk about what options you should consider when deciding what deployment target you want to use, and then how you go about doing the deployments. And then obviously like community articles where people will cover things that we don't identify in docs. And last but not least, I have a community link. Just a fun little blog post. It's all about persisting user preferences in a Blazor application using this little package called blazor.localstorage. I'm not sure if you've ever heard about it. You might have heard about it. Blazor.localstorage is one of the open source projects that is produced by our guest today, Chris. It was actually very apt that I was able to find this article. It's a relatively long read. What I like about it is that it's very thorough. It starts by giving you a background context into the local storage API that exists in the browser and covers how you can go about leveraging the local storage package in your Blazor application. And then essentially what you're building is having the ability for users to set the theme on a Blazor app. Say people are wanting to do dark mode on their apps, they can set dark mode and that preference will be saved in their browser. So whenever they open your app, it'll be all in dark mode. And this is using Blazor local storage, which our guest today, Chris, has produced for the community. And with that, I think we're going to segue it off to Chris. We've got the community links in the banner on the stream if you want to check them out, or dive into any of these articles further. But Chris, tell us all about the Blazard ecosystem.
Cool. Well, first of all, just want to say thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. So thank you very much. Blazard. So, wow. So Blazard was a little bit of a pet project of mine. I wanted to get into some open source, and I just started working with Blazor and things like this. And when Blazor was very new, when a few of us were pioneering with it in sort of 2018, I think it was. There's all these things that weren't in C# or whatever. So started building some, and local storage, funnily enough, was actually the first NuGet package I ever made. So it's quite apt that you found an article talking about that one. And John, who wrote that article, is a friend I know from doing DDD conferences. So
cool.
Very, very good at his blog post. So so he did well with that one. If you want, we'll swap over to my screen and I'll start talking through some bits. So this is the Blazard organization on GitHub. I think it's probably important to sort of point out quite early on that not all these packages actually belong to me anymore. So a few people have asked if they can host their packages in Blazard, and I've sort of helped out with doing CI/CD for them and helping them get set up with NuGet and things. So just want to call out them first, really. So first of all, down here we've got the video package, and that's done by a name that's probably quite familiar, SQL Mr. Magoo. So he maintains and works on that one. And then down here we've got text editor, Blazor text editor, and that's by Michael Washington.
Oh, great.
MVP. Michael's worked very hard on that. That wraps Quill.js under the hood. So he maintains and runs that repository. So I'm sort of quite glad to have kind of help enable other people into open source and do that. So that's quite cool, and well done to them for all that excellent community work. These are all the various packages. What I'm going to highlight today is kind of the four main ones that people use. So we've got Blazor Local Storage, Blazor Modal, Blazor Toast, and Blazor Typeahead. So we're going to sort of work through those. I'll just give you sort of some examples of using them, how you can configure them, and if anyone's got any questions, then feel free to interrupt, and I'll do my best to answer them. So we'll start off with Blazor Local Storage. That seems an apt place to begin. So I've got a little test app set up here, and we're just going to go through and just sort of check out some of the basic features. So for starters, to get set up, basically all we've got to do is add the Blazor Local Storage NuGet package, which is, I think, currently version 3. And then once you've done that, it's just a case of registering the services, which you can do either in the program main if you're in Blazor WebAssembly, or you can do it in the startup class if you're in Blazor Server. And you just have to add in this add Blazor Local Storage method, and that will do all the heavy lifting for you. From that point forward, you can just then inject a service called iLocalStorage and interact with local storage however you want. So let's just have a quick look first at how this. Where's my browser? Let me just hide that. Yeah. There we go. So this is the application running. So for anyone who's not familiar with local storage, and let me just clear that out. Spoiler for later. It's basically just a key value pair store. So what we can do is just give a bit of give anything, add in a key, and then just pass in any kind of string data we want. And that's kind of another key point to understand, that it's always string based. So let's just go Blazor and stand up. And if I hit save, you'll see that appears now in this application under local storage. And local storage is tied to like a domain. So you can store stuff for a particular domain, and when you go to a different domain, that data won't be there. So it's kind of sandboxed by the browser, which is handy. So for the example that John gave in his post, you can save user preferences and retrieve them every time they revisit the site. And it persists over time. So it doesn't matter if I close this tab, close the browser, reboot my machine, this value will stay here until I remove it. That's as opposed to session storage, which is this one down here. And that anything that's saved in there only lasts as long as the browser tab is alive. So if I shut the browser, whatever's in there gets scrapped. So that's possibly useful for more sensitive data or just session-based data. And there is another package I have called Blazor Session Storage, which allows you to interact with that as well. But it works exactly the same as this one. So I'm not gonna duplicate up there. So back to the demo, and basically, like I say, we've got this key and this value stored in here. So how does that work? Well, if we come over and I'm going to open up this page, you can see that the first thing I'm doing is I'm injecting the iLocal storage service. So that's the service that's added from the Blazor local storage package. And that has got a load of methods on it we can call, but the ones that we care about, or the one that we care about at the moment, is this one called setItemAsync. It has two parameters we can pass in. We've got the key and then the data that we want to save. And like I say, the key thing to remember here is this has always got to be saved as a string value. So a question that you might have immediately is, why do I want to use Blazor local storage as opposed to just interoping with local storage myself? Mm-hmm. Well, the value add for local storage is that what we try to do is handle serialization for you if you want to do more complex stuff. So in this particular example, I'm just saving a string. So we don't need to do anything here. And Blazor local storage under the hood, it checks types and it goes, okay, this is a string. I don't need to worry about serialization or anything like that. I can just push it into local storage. But if we, I keep doing that. If we come over to here, we've got a more complex version here. We've got a form. And if I start entering data into this one, so if I put Chris, Sainty, and an age I'd really like to be, and hit save, if we come down here now, you can see that we're actually saving a JSON object instead. So what's happening is under the hood, the library is going to serialize that object for you into a string format and save it into local storage. And when you call it out, we can deserialize it. So we'll come back to this one in a second. So I'm just going to clear that one out. Actually, I'll clear them both up for now. So that first version we looked at was saving values. Actually, sorry, I'll put that back in. There we go. So like I said, we want to get values as well. And we do the same thing. We have a method called, surprisingly enough, getItemAsync. And again, you pass it a key and it's going to pull the value out. So if I type in Blazor and I hit load, you can see it brings back that stand-up value for us. So again, if we look over at the code for that, it's basically the same sort of thing. We inject local storage service, and then we call getItem as string async. So the key, there's a key thing here. So this is a slightly different method. So this as string async. In this instance, because I know that I'm retrieving a string, I can use getItem as string async, and that will not try to deserialize it for me into any types. It's not going to try and do anything clever. It's just going to give me it back as a string. So this is actually something that we added relatively recently, and this was because some people want to actually control the serialization process. They don't necessarily want the library to do it for them. We use system text JSON under the hood to do the serialization, but others like to use Newtonsoft JSON, for example, or something like that. So when you're using the setItemAsync, if what you pass to it is already a string, i.e. you might have already serialized a more complex object using Newtonsoft JSON, it's not going to try and do anything. It will just save that. And then you can retrieve that value using getItem as string async and then deserialize it yourself. So that method is quite useful in a couple of ways. Like I say, if you're going to manually handle serialization and deserialization, or if you know you're just working with a plain string, it's going to bypass all of the serialization stuff that's happening. It's probably going to be slightly more performant as well because of that. Not that performance is a huge issue, but if you're trying to get every little morsel of performance, that could be useful to you. So that's kind of some basics of saving and getting values out.
Hey, Chris, we
Yes.
have a question from someone in the community, which is, does this package work exactly the same way in Blazor Server versus Blazor WASM? Is there a difference?
No, it works exactly the same. So Everything you've seen so far has got obviously async on the end. So unsurprisingly, it's all working asynchronously. And that's the key to making it work on Blazor Server and Blazor WebAssembly. We have to have asynchronous calls for Blazor Server to work over the SignalR connection. So that will all work absolutely fine. The key thing to do in Blazor Server is to always remember to do this kind of stuff in your on-after render methods, so that basically JavaScript is available at that point. You're going to have an issue if you try and do this in the onInitialized lifecycle method on Blazor Server, because when it runs a pre-rendering, JavaScript isn't available at that point, and it's going to blow up for you. So as long as you do it in the on-after render method, you'll be absolutely fine. Interestingly enough, and we'll see this in a second, we actually have a different, we actually have a second option for Blazor WebAssembly. So if you want to do synchronous calls, that is possible with Blazor WebAssembly because you are in the browser. And we actually have a second service that allows you to make synchronous calls if you need to for any particular reason. But we'll see that in a second. Cool. So the final bit to kind of clear up the basics is the remove. So obviously we've got this Blazor key down here. So as you probably expect, I can type in a key, hit delete, and you can see it gets removed now from local storage. And that, again, pretty much as you'd expect, is the same thing. We have a remove item async that you pass a key to, and it's going to clear that out of local storage for you. We also have another method as well called clear async, and this one is just an obliterate everything. That's going to wipe everything out of local storage regardless of how many keys you've got. So that's quite handy if you just want to totally trash everything and start from scratch. These names also we tried to mimic the API, the browser API names as well. So if you are coming from a JavaScript background, for example, these names should look familiar to the APIs that you would normally work with in JavaScript. So we do try to mirror those. So coming back to the more complex stuff, you can start to see some. I want to try and show you some sort of more useful real world stuff for Blazor local storage. So when we're dealing with forms, one thing that's kind of can be frustrating, not in say a form like this, but certainly in a bigger form, is if you're halfway through it and it crashes, or a user accidentally clicks something and navigates away and things like that. So you can actually use Blazor local storage here to kind of help give your users a better experience. So if I start typing in this form like I was before, if I do this and then I just click somewhere else and come back, obviously all my data is gone. Mm-hmm. But what we can do is, with a little bit of work, we can actually have this persist into local storage when we navigate, and we can also kind of reload it as well. So we're going to just put that in now and see what that looks like. So I'm just going to close all these bits down, and we're going to go into this final example. So what we've got here is a standard edit form that's got a few fields, and it's bound to this my form object, which has just got first name, last name, and this favorite number that I've got in here. And then down below, what we're going to do is we're going to transform this at the moment. So the save to local storage, load from local storage is only happening on those button clicks. What we want to do is handle it when we navigate. So we're just going to add in a couple of bits here. So I'm going to inject the navigation manager, and I'm also going to make this particular component implement iDisposable. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I'm going to hook onto the navigation manager's location changed event. And when that happens, I'm going to sort of try and save data. And I'm going to also try and do it on the dispose. So if someone closes the tab by mistake, that should capture it as well. So we're going to do that. And then I'm going to add in this dispose method as well. So let me just pop that in. So what we've got here is on dispose. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take that local storage service that is injected at the top, and I'm going to downcast it down to this iSync local storage service. And this is the synchronous version that I was talking about before. And then from that, I'm just going to call set item on that. And then that should be like that. I'm going to save a key called my form with the form data at that particular point in time in it. So if I just save that one and come back and do a little refresh. Let that rebuild. Cool. So now if I type in some data like this and I navigate away, you'll see now that it's actually persisted my form data into local storage when I navigated away from the component. So you can see you've got my first name, my last name, favorite number 0, because I hadn't filled that bit of information in just yet. So that can be quite helpful. That should also work when I close the browser tab. So if I was on there and I actually hit close, it should clean that up, and it should save that before the app closes down completely. So that can be a really useful use case for local storage in your applications. In fact, there I didn't even have to actually hook onto the navigation changed event at that point. I could just use the dispose event. So while we've got that there, what we can also do is another little nice helper is on initialized, I can actually use another one of the Blazor local storage methods called contains key to check to see if there's already a key in local storage called my form. And if there is, I'm going to pull it out and I'm going to reload the form so the user can basically carry on from where they left off. So if I've got a saved form, then we're going to call this load from local storage down here, which is then going to call local storage get item async. So this is not get item as string like it was before. This is the version where we do the deserialization, and we're saying we want to deserialize back to my form. So if we just save that, I keep clicking that one, and I refresh. So this time around, I'm going to clear all this down before I start. And oh, there we go. And if I come back, you can see that the form's reloading each time. So the date is already in there. So my first name, my last name, that's already been populated for me. And now I can sort of carry on where I left off and save the last bit of data. So that can be quite a useful case for local storage in your applications. It can help save users a bit of pain if they're filling out large forms, and it's not too tricky to implement that functionality.
That's great. I mean, that's one of the worst things that will happen in a browser. You take a long time, you fill out the fields, pass all the validation errors, and then something happens and you don't save it, and then, oh no. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've been a victim of this more than I care to admit, to be fair. So yeah.
So we've got a question from the community that I think would be interesting to answer. Quite a few people have asked about size limits on the amount of data that you can store in local storage. So what are your thoughts on that, and what support does Blazor local storage provide for handling any errors related to that? And also curious about what's the difference between local storage and session storage, and when should we be using this local storage package?
Yeah. So let me start with the difference again between local storage and session storage. So I mentioned earlier, like local storage is more persistent. So when you save a key and a value into local storage, that's going to persist, through closing the tabs, closing the browser, rebooting your machine, coming back to it. That value is going to stay in there. Session storage, on the other hand, that will only persist for the lifetime of that particular tab. So if I was using Blazor session storage at the moment to store this information, if I close the tab, that my form value that's there, that would be lost now. And if I reopen the application, there would be nothing in session storage. It would be empty, and it would be a new session, and I'd be starting from scratch again. So that's the kind of key difference between the two stores. Local storage is for long-term persistence. Session storage is for session-based persistence. The question on size limits is a tricky one. I'm not sure. I don't think it's actually a 5 megabyte limit. I think the limit is to do with the amount of memory that's available on a particular machine. I think it's quite convoluted. It's not. I don't think it's that straightforward. I've looked into this a bit, and there's been an issue opened with local storage for a while about how we can detect size limits and sort of try and be useful to consumers of the library about if they're trying to save too much data, if it's not going to work, and things like this. But so far, we've not really managed to find a way to crack it. It is tricky. Different browsers have different memory allocations for local storage, different limits, and there's not a particularly consistent way to achieve it. There's a few options out there that people have used and people sort of suggest, but they're not consistent. They all have a bug in them or a hole in them somewhere that makes them not sort of not overly reliable in every scenario. And that's why we've chosen not to put anything in yet, because we don't really want to put anything in the library that's not going to be consistent and is not going to sort of provide a good user experience. We'd rather not put the feature in until it's ready. I think what I generally say guidance-wise of what you put in local storage is user preference data, that kind of thing, this kind of form persistence, that's the kind of data that should go in local storage. If it's bigger than that, don't use an API, like store it on the server. Local storage is not a alternative for a SQL database. I've spoken to a few people who have tried to put literally like 10,000 rows of data into like local storage and stuff. And that's not what it's designed to do.
We did have some people in the chat say like, oh no, what if you did so? And it's true, you could do dumb things with this, but for the most part, the examples you're showing there, that's not a lot of data. That's a little bit, right? So
yeah, it's quite trivial, and it's always amazing how much data you can actually serialize and store before it's actually getting to any like really crazy amount. I mean, to fill up 5 gig of local storage, you've got to be persisting some pretty chunky data sets to do that. So like I say, I think in that scenario, I'd be curious as to whether that data should be on the browser or whether it should be being stored on a server and retrieved through an API, I think. Cool. If there's no more questions, that kind of wraps up local storage. There's not sort of a great amount to this one. It basically is saving and retrieving. So I think we've covered pretty much everything on that one.
Sure.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Show us what's next.
So we're going to go over next. So what we'll go to now is we're going to go over and have a look at Blazor Toast next. So let me just spin this one up. So Blazor Toast, this was actually, and that's sharing the same port, that's why that didn't work. Blazor Toast was, I think, either the second or third library I put together. And that's because it was when I used to do ASP.NET and Angular. And I really got used to Toast, and I really like that kind of way of presenting notifications to the user. So I thought, well, that's something that we should have in Blazor natively. So set about trying to do this in a C# only way. So Blazor Toast, as it stands at the moment, uses no JavaScript whatsoever. That does all of this using pure C#. And basically what you do is you just fire off toasts and they pop up and they go in a nice list down the side there, and a timer's firing, and they will all clear themselves off automatically after a given period of time. So that's kind of the base configuration. And to get this one working, there's the NuGet package to install, which is Blazor Toast. We have some base styles as well, which you've just seen there. So we do this. So we have a CSS file that you need to reference in the host page. We add some services to program main, and then we have a Blazor Toast component that goes in the main layout. So if we go back over to the application, we'll just have a quick look at these bits. So in program, again, we've got a helper for doing the services. So you just call add Blazor Toast. And then once you've got that in there, like I said, we also need a link to the style sheet. So we have Blazor Toast in there, and that's all minified for you as well. So that should keep any bundle sizes smaller. And then finally, the last thing, like I said, is you have to add in this Blazor Toast to your main layout. So the reason you have to add this in is because that kind of gives us an anchor point to inject these toast messages into the page. So what happens behind the scenes is you inject a service into any of your components that you want to trigger a toast from. And then when you do that, an event fires, and this particular component picks that up. It takes all that toast information that you've specified, and then it actually renders the toast out on the screen. So let's have a look what a basic toast looks like. So to start off with, we're going to inject the iToast service. And then once you've done that, you can then just call a set of, there's 4 methods on here, sort of 4 helper methods you can call that give you a predefined looking toast. So you have an info toast, a success toast, a warning toast, and an error toast. With them, the minimum you need to do is specify a message that's shown in that toast. So here you can see, like, I'm an info, I'm a success, I'm a warning. So if you go back over here and we see that fire, you can see that's shown here, and we'll provide a heading for you. So you don't actually have to provide a heading if you don't want to. You can just, like I say, present a message. But if you do want to go into there and sort of configure it more and have more customization over it, then you can. And we've got a load of different ways you can do that. So to start off with, if we go in settings, like I say, the first thing is you might want to say, give a custom heading instead. So here we might, we'll put Blazor Community Stand Up and hello everyone. And if I hit show toast, you can see now that we can change that header and we can get a different message displaying. So if we have a quick look at that. Now, obviously I'm just binding some inputs here to capture those values, but what we're doing is calling show toast, but with one of its overloads. So I'm calling show toast here and I'm saying the particular message type that I want to show is info. And now I'm saying, here's the message and here's the heading. So another way I could do that instead of using this is I could go back to that show info that I had before, and then I wouldn't need to specify any of that. I could just say, here's a message and a heading. So there's lots of ways you can configure this dynamically and have things update and change. So if I save that now and I come back over here and I reload this and let that rebuild, if I just put foo bar, so I've got that info toast. And I can change it to success, refresh, and again I can put in my custom messages, and that didn't refresh, that didn't reload that time. There we go, and now I've got success toast instead. So that's all right, but what about if you want to have it in a different place, for example? What happens if I want to move it around on the screen? I don't want my toast turning up in the top right. I want them coming out of the bottom left. Well, for that, we can customize settings. Now, all of the settings at the moment for Blazor Toasters are all global. So we can set them on this Blazor Toast component that's in the main layout, and they'll affect all toasts in the application. So, for example, if I want to change the position, I can set the position parameter, and I can say, right, toast position, and we're going to go, right, I want that in the bottom right this time. So if I save that and rebuild and I refresh this, I'm going to hit show toast now, and now we've got it in the bottom right. So all my toasts are now appearing from the bottom right. Out of the box, we give you a load of pre-baked. So you've basically got, bottom, middle, center, left and right, top, left and right, and so you can pick any of those, and we'll just do all the hard work for you of positioning it in the right place. So that's cool. But the next thing is what about timeout? So by default, we give you 5 seconds timeout. So every toast is going to hang around for 5 seconds, and then we're going to remove it. But maybe you don't want your users to wait around that long. So perhaps you want to get it sort of there and gone really, really quickly. So you can set the timeout to a different value. So 1 second, for example. So if we come over and refresh this time, we hit show toast, we get the toast, but it very, very quickly disappears now. So you can tweak and customize that. And obviously you can use these in combination with each other. I'm just showing you each one individually. So another feature we added more recently was the progress bar. So if we set show progress bar to true, what we can now do is on our toast, you'll now see a progress bar for how long it's going to be around. So this can be quite useful if you do have a long timeout on your toasts, and it can give the user a bit of idea of how long they're going to be waiting. So you can see that we have a ticker along the bottom there, and that's showing you how long's left, and then ping, and we disappear. So that's quite a sort of nice one that was in one of the JavaScript Toast libraries I used to like. So we got that implemented. So that can be quite useful.
I really like that as a UI thing, just to show the feedback, and then I can look and say, oh, I don't need to worry about dismissing it. It's going to clear itself out.
Yeah, definitely. And if it's moving a bit too slow from you, you can always hit that X in the top corner and get rid of it quick. So yeah, it's definitely a good one. So another one that we've put in, again, this is relatively recently, is support for different icon types. So at the moment, we support 2 icon libraries, so Font Awesome and Material Icons. And what you can do is you can specify the icon type you want to use. So Font Awesome, for example, here. And what I've done as well is in my host page, my index.html, I've got a link here to the Font Awesome CSS file that's going to have all of the wonderful icons there. And then for each different type of toast, I can specify a particular icon that I want to show. So here I'm saying for info toasts, I want to show an icon with them. In this case, it's the info circle icon. So if I save that now, and if I go back and we rerun the app, I hit show toast, now you can see I'm getting that nice icon to the side. So it just makes things a little bit more interesting when you're doing these. And you can obviously then set whatever icons you want for your toasts. So if you don't like the eye, if you want to use something else instead, you can just configure it here to whatever you want. And like I say, the other option we have is Font Awesome. Is Material. So if you prefer to use Material icons, if you're using one of those themes, you can set the icon type to Material, and then again, you can provide the classes that they need for those icons. So you've got that configurability there as well. So the last bit I was going to go over is the navigation. I can't remember what this bit of code does. So I'm just that's it. The last one is remove total navigation. Right. So this is something that is a good example that when you're building these stuff, until people use it, you don't think of these things. So someone raised an issue and said, I've got toast showing when something completes, and then I navigate away, but they're still there. And I was like, yeah, they will be, because we don't, obviously, because this is sitting in the main layout, that's always present. So what we've done is add in this setting to remove total navigation. So what we do here, under the hood, we listen on for the location changed event on the navigation manager. And if you've enabled this, we just remove all of the toasts immediately. So if I save that and we go back over and have a play around with this, if I go to basic usage and I'll fire a few toasts off and I navigate, you can see they all immediately disappear. So that just clears everything off quite nicely. If I go back and just show you that without that, it can create a little bit of a weird scenario where if we fire a load of toasts off and we navigate, they're still there when we're on another page. And now they're probably not relevant to what's on this page anymore, and they're probably just getting in the way. So that, again, is another useful setting for when you're playing around with toast in real-world apps. Yeah. Yeah,
that's pretty cool. We had a question from someone in the audience, which you showed a couple of the ways they can be customized. They were curious to know, can you add custom animations to your toasts? And I'm also curious to see if you can, what support is there for customizing the CSS that's used to render the actual toast itself?
Yeah. So at the moment, you can't add any custom animations, mainly because we're not using any animations as such at the moment. We're using a bit of CSS sort of trickery to make it look like we're fading in. But as you may have noticed, they disappear quite abruptly. And that's because when our timer that's running in the background says that a toast is ready to be removed, we literally remove it from the DOM and it immediately just disappears, and there's no niceties of that at all. In the next major release for Blazor Toast, we're going to have the ability to do animations. So you'll be able to tailor how toasts come in, how they disappear, if they're fading in and out, what that time limit is and stuff like that. And that's because of some progress we've made in some of the other libraries, learning how to do animations with Blazor and avoiding JavaScript for it. So we've got a C# method of doing animations now. So that will be in the next major release. So it's coming on that one. In terms of if you want to customize Blazor toasts at the moment, the best option again for that at the moment is to probably just override some of our styles. As it stands at the moment, we've got various classes for each particular component you can override. So, for example, if you want to say for my error toast, I want to use a particular class on those, you can just give us an alternate class, and we'll render that instead of the default one. So we provide one of those for each of the 4 standard types of toast. So that sort of will allow you to, like I say, tweak it however you want. That's going to get applied to the main kind of container of the toast. So if you want to get more granular about any like internals of it in the internal structure, that's where you probably have to fall back to overriding our sort of styles in your style sheet. But if you're doing sort of just relatively high level look and feel stuff, these classes should be enough to be able to make it look and feel like your application style. Cool. Lovely stuff.
Yeah.
So that's Blazor Toast. So what we'll do now is move on, and I'm gonna we'll have a look at Blazor Type Ahead next. So I want to say Blazor Modal to the end. So Blazor Type Ahead is probably one of the more complex libraries. It has a lot going on. I didn't realize when I started building a type ahead how difficult it actually is. And more importantly, I didn't realize how much it's a game of smoke and mirrors. And I'll explain what I mean by that as we go. So Blazor Type Ahead, it allows you to kind of do what it says on the tin, that you can start typing, and it's going to give you suggestions that you can use to fill out. So what we've got here, if I get a bigger list, we can navigate up and down using arrow keys. So you probably can't hear it as such, but I'm pressing up and down on I've not got a mouse, I'm going up and down here on the arrow key. So we can do that. We can hit enter to select the value. I can hit escape, and I can start typing in something else. So I can sort of do a lot of stuff with the keyboard, basically. And basically that's it. You can select values and do all this stuff. Now, that looks quite simple on the hood, but there's actually a lot you can configure with this and a lot of different ways you can do it. So at the moment, this particular demo is doing everything using local data. So in this Blazor WebAssembly app, I've got a local data store that's got a list of people's names in it, and it's querying that to bring the results back. So if we have a quick look at the solution here, in this basic usage here, what I'm doing is I'm using the Blazor Type Ahead component. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of stuff already for this. So there's quite a lot of configurability with this one. You can really tweak it how you want. The key things that we need you to provide in order to use this is a template for a selected item and a template for results. So results template is the rendered sort of suggestion list, the items in there, and you can customize the look and feel of each of those. And the selected template is for when you select an item out of that list, how that looks when it's in that sort of input style at that point. The other thing you need to do is provide us a search method. So we obviously don't know where you want to get your data from. So what we're going to do is you're going to pass us a method that has a particular signature. So if we come down here and look at that, that's what the signature is that we're going to look for. We're going to have it. We need you to give us a method that's going to return a task of enumerable of a type, and we're going to pass you in a search string, and that's going to be what the user's entered into that search field. At that point, you go off and you get the data however you want, and you can use whatever logic you want to bring that data back. So, like I said, in this instance, I've got this local people data class, and I'm going there. I'm just using some link. I'm just going into there, and I'm just getting everybody that has a first name that contains the search text in it, and I'm bringing that back. And when you give it back to us, we're going to use the result template to render that in that search that suggestion list, and then you can pick it. And like I say, that's where the selected template comes into play. Some other bits here as well is when you've selected a person, you can then use bind value, same as you would with any of the out of the box Blazor form controls. So they all so input text, input number, all those types. You can bind the same way here. So when you select an item, we're going to feed that back into the value part, the property you pass here. So selected person in this case, and you can see I've got that down here as a field. One of the other things you can do with type ahead, again, because we're trying to follow the patterns from the other form controls in Blazor, is you can capture a reference to that component, and you can use that to focus it. So up here, at the top here, sorry, you can see that I've captured that reference to type ahead, and I can call .focus on it, and that's going to be able to focus it. So if I go back to here and I click focus, you can see I can now type from there. So we tried to mimic sort of the features that are in the standard form components from Blazor as much as possible when we've been building this out. The other thing is we give you some extra bits and bobs that you can do. So you can customize the some other bits like the footer template, for example. So here, got this footer template that's got a button, and this button is going to use the navigation manager and navigate to another page. So if I just save that one off and I refresh, and that didn't build either. Let me get that a go. There we go. So if I type now, I've now got this button available in the footer. So if I click this button, you can see it actually pings me off to another page. Now, I've obviously just done this for the sake of this demo, but what's probably a more real world use case for doing this is where you have a type ahead that's got a load of suggestions in it, but the user can't find a suggestion they want, and they want to say add an item to that list. So you can actually have that button invoke a form that allows them to enter a new, a new entry in the list, for example. So that's one use case for it. I mean, obviously you can use it forever, whatever you like, really. It's totally under your control. So any valid HTML can go in there. So that's the kind of basic usage. So what's probably more common in a lot of scenarios is to actually use remote data, because most of the time with Blazor, if we're running Blazor WebAssembly, we're probably going to want to query data from a database that's behind our API. So we're going to want to make an API call to do that. So we've got a few features to help you do that in a good way. So here is what looks like the same box. And if I start typing, you can see I'm getting the same suggestions back. But actually what's happening if I open the browser tools here and clear this out, and type in again, you can see we're actually making a network call at this point. So if I inspect this, you can see that we're going off to an endpoint here, people / and then whatever the current characters is I've typed, and I get a response back, which is a JSON object coming back with the data that matched that. So if we go over to the solution again, so this is why there's a server project here. So this is a Blazor WebAssembly hosted template. So in here, I've got a controller, my people controller that's got a hard-coded list of people, and an endpoint that's just going to do the same thing that local version was doing. It's going to find anybody with a first name that contains the search string and return them back to us as a list. So in terms of the setup on this one, it's mainly the same, except for a slight difference to do with efficiency. So when we're making network calls, that's a bit more costly than the searching locally. You probably don't want to do that the second the user's pressing a key. So what we allow you to do is set a debounce on the component. So what a debounce is going to do is it's going to wait a period of time before it executes the search. So in this particular case, I'm saying wait 500 milliseconds before you trigger the search method. And this is quite useful because if someone's typing away, you want to let them finish typing the string they're typing before you make a network request, rather than every single character. And that's what the debounce functionality does. Now you can enhance that one step further by also applying a minimum length to the search term. So again, I'm doing that here. I'm saying I've got a minimum length of 3 characters because if I'm going off to a database that's got hundreds of thousands of rows and I do it with 1 character, chances are I'm going to get a pretty hefty data set back, and that's not going to be very usable. So here we're saying, right, well, we want a minimum of 3 characters in our search term before we want to do anything, because that's just the only way that we're going to have a decent user experience. So you can configure that there as well. Now, what's also useful when you're using this minimum length is a way to feed back to the user what's going on. And you might have seen it when I was typing a second ago. We have a help template, and that's to do with, that's tied into this minimum length. So in this case, I'm using it to tell the user that they haven't reached the minimum length if they type less characters. So if I go back to that example, if I just type H, you can see that we then get that help template displayed to just give me a little cue to say, no, you need to type a little bit more. You're not quite there yet. And then once I'm there, it will disappear and it will get replaced with whatever comes back from calling that search method. So that can be quite useful. And hopefully with this, you can really tune this component to be performant for your application. We have some other settings as well on here that can help you deal with like data volumes as well. So there we go. So we have this maximum suggestions property. So with this, this is just an integer value of how many you want to show. So for example, you can set that to 10. And what it's going to do is, out of the list that you send back from your search method, we're just going to pick the top 10 of those and display those in the suggestions box. So if you do have a untuned call that is going to bring back like 10,000 rows from a database, for example, if you set this, you shouldn't hit any major issues because we're only ever going to render 10 of those. We're not going to try and render all 10,000 in some like gigantic suggestion list that is going to have people scrolling for days. So you can really tweak a lot of this to like I say, to help with the performance.
Yep. Chris, someone on the audience was curious. Does this type ahead component allow you to filter the results on a fuzzy basis? Like, can I do a substring search on the list of items, or can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, largely speaking, because the actual code for the search method is provided by you, so you can create the search however you want. So for example, I'll go back to the local one because it's just a little bit easier to talk through. So with my local data one here, I'm going to my list of people and I'm doing it based on their first name. I'm putting all their first names to lower. I'm putting my search text to lower. So I'm taking casing out of it. I could use invariant case or string compares, but I just kind of threw this one together. And I'm just saying, just bring me back any first name that contains this set of characters, no matter where it is. Now, I could come back, I could tweak this and say, well, only bring me back first names that begin with this set of characters, for example. I could tweak this however I want. I could, do uppercasing or whatever, case sensitive matching, So because this is provided by you, it's totally under your control, however you want this search to work.
Cool.
Lovely. So, moving on to sort of more of the options that you have with this. So we have a drop-down mode. So if you want to have the type ahead act more like a drop-down, you can. So when you enable drop-down mode, you get this little arrow now. So you can then click the arrow and it's just going to pop it open like it would do a select, a sort of HTML select element. And then you can just select items from it like you would in a standard way. The cool thing about this is obviously it drops open, but you can still, if you want to, still type. So you get the best of both worlds here. And this one, again, is a good example of where using that maximum suggestions is quite useful, because if you're going to have someone pop it open manually, again, you're not going to want to render everything because at that point, you've not got any search text. So yeah, again, using the maximum search here is probably a good idea. But to enable that, all you got to do is set show drop down on focus to true and enable drop down to true, and then you can set show drop down on focus to true as well. So when you click in it, it'll automatically pop it open as well. So you get that sort of that experience however you come into the control.
Cool.
Outside of that as well, we also have a multi-select mode. So if you want to have a type ahead that allows you to get more than one value, you can start typing.
Oh, nice.
You can just keep going. So you can just start adding in as many as you want. And you'll notice here as well, we do some styling for you. So you can see that Chris Rain is in here twice as well, which is weird. But you've got that different... You've got that different styling in the background. If I select another one, oh, that's broken. There we go. Oh, demo gods have got me, haven't they? It was going to happen. It was going to happen. Let me come back.
Well, so two things. One is that is an awesome feature because that's something where, like, we use this in the chat. People are asking about use cases of Blazor, and we use it to run the live.net site, which is where we kind of list upcoming shows and list previous shows and stuff. And I can see adding in those tags that would really be useful. But another question. Okay, so that was potentially a bug there. How do you do testing for these?
Well,
because I mean that's a really important part, right?
It's a very important thing. And Eagle, who does B Unit, who I think you had on a few shows ago, I regularly speak with Eagle, and he's a very talented guy. And I feel horrific now saying this that I haven't put any testing yet. It is on my
sorry to catch you on this one because I actually wanted to give you props on a lot of these. I looked at the code before this, and a lot of them have some pretty good tests.
Yeah.
So
we try to do it wherever we can. And what I'm also trying to do as well now is provide test helpers for people consuming the library. So if you're using the library and you're testing with B Unit, I'm trying to build out some test helpers that will do some configuration for you in your test to handle all of our services that happen in the background, so that when you want to test some of your Blazor components that use any of the Blazor stuff we've been looking at today, you can use those test helpers and you don't have to worry about all the fiddly stuff that goes on in the background, creating fakes and all this kind of stuff. We'll do all that for you. We'll provide all that for you. So it's just, unfortunately, it's like everything, it's finding the time, balancing that with new features and things. But they are on the issue list, and I promise they will get there. And I'm sorry, Eagle, for not testing everything. I will get there.
Well, is that an area, like some of these you mentioned, there are community contributions. Is it helpful for people to contribute unit tests for these?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, it would be fantastic.
Great.
I think contributing tests as well is a really great way to get into open source. If you're someone who's like new, thinking like, where do I start? How do I sort of break into it? Because it's a scary thing to start getting into open source. Like as a contributor, I mean, it took me a while to get the bottle to do it as a maintainer. Like so, and to do it as a contributor is equally as scary because you're putting your code out there for someone else to critique and for the public to see. It's a nerve-wracking experience, but it's a good experience. And there's been I think we've had across the various Blazor repos, we've had well over 50 unique contributors across the whole sort of Blazor ecosystem, which is really fantastic. And what I really like is that there's quite a good chunk of those are first-time contributors for any open source. So it's really fantastic to see people coming into open source and doing it by contributing something to Blazor, which has been, that's quite humbling, to be honest. It's quite nice when people do that. But yeah, as a maintainer, I'd take anything, to be honest. Any help you can give is always appreciated. Docs is another really big one. And again, that's another good place to start. I think if you're very new to the open source world, writing some docs about how something works is really, really, really useful. And I don't think there's a maintainer on GitHub that would turn down those types of contributions. So yeah, definitely.
Awesome.
So moving past the multi-select, and we'll go to another scenario. So binding to a property. So this is another interesting one from a real world use case. So if you're so the examples we looked at so far are binding to a complex object. So you saw earlier we were binding to a person property, and that was typed as a person with a first name and a last name and stuff like that. But what's probably more realistic in apps is that you're going to want that nice, rich user experience on the UI of seeing all the names, seeing those nice customizable templates and bits and bobs. But you don't really want that information saved back to your database. You probably just want an ID. So we actually, we've got a way of doing that for you as well. So for example, if I select John Smith again, he's got an ID of 1. So when I select him this time, I'm actually going to bind to I'm going to bind to a property and save his ID rather than him as an object and then have to get his ID from that object and then do some stuff. So that can be a useful thing for people to have. So if I open up this example, this one requires a little bit more work, because when you save an ID, you also need a way of getting back to that person object to reload if you're coming back for whatever reason. So there's a few more bits here. So we have the search method as normal, but then we also have this convert method. And this convert method is going to take the value that you're going to bind to. So in this case, we have selected person ID, which is an integer field. And it's going to take that, and you're going to have to return the more complex type. So you're going to have to take an int and return a person in this case. So if we scroll down, let's have a quick look at the methods on this one. So find people is the same as it was before, but convert person is working. The convert person works the other way. So it takes the type, and returns back the thing you want. So we take in the person that gets passed to you from whatever you selected from the suggestion list. And then you have to provide back whatever piece of information is relevant to the property you bind. So in this case, it's the ID of the person. So we're just returning back the integer value here, and then that will get pushed into the selected person ID by the control. So that's the saving side of it. When you're reloading, it gets a bit weird. So you have to have this kind of a little bit awkward syntax. I'll be honest. I'd love to come up with a slightly more nicer way of doing this, but I haven't found a way yet. And what it is when the selected template is executed. So say you already have, say we're loading this type ahead for the first time on the page load, and we've already got a selected person ID, and we'll show you that in a second because I've got routes up for that. What it's going to do is the selected template will get invoked, and it has a person ID passed to it. So what I'm going to do is in this template, I'm going to call this load selected person method, passing in the person ID, and that's going to bring me back a person. And then I'm just going to render out the first name and the last name like I had been doing before. So if we go back over, we know that John Smith has got an ID of 1. If I navigate and come back, you see he's not there. But if I actually put his ID in the header and let that reload this time, you can see that it's come back and it's reloaded John Smith as an entity. And he's pre-selected. So if you're using Blazor type ahead in a form, for example, which we'll get to in a second, and you're editing that form, you can reload values this way. So that's quite a useful one, because like I say, you don't really want to be persisting entire objects back and forth. No. You just want to deal with that ID. So to finish up with type ahead is forms. So type ahead is fully integrated into Blazor's inbuilt form system. So that works with edit form out of the box. It integrates with the validation system in Blazor, so it works with an edit context behind the scenes. What it does is it actually intelligently works out whether it's part of a form or not by checking for a cascaded edit context. So if for people who are not as in the depths of Blazor, so when you're using an edit form creates an edit context under the hood, and it cascades it down to all of the form components, and it's a way of organizing the validation mechanisms that happen. It fires off validation events and all this kind of stuff. So Blazor type ahead integrates with that and allows all of the normal validation to work. So if I hit submit, for example, here, you can see that I get a red border around the control. I get a validation message, and it's going to do all the stuff that you get with a normal control. So if we look here and we have a look underneath the hood, you can see that we're actually applying an invalid class in the same way that Blazor's.
I didn't get that. Could you?
Sorry, my Siri's trying to butt in. So it will apply an invalid, a valid, and a modified class in the same way that the Blazor built-in form components do. So we mirror that behavior again. If we go under the hood and look at this one, you can see that the only real difference here, like this, the Blazor type ahead is configured the same way it has been up till now. The only difference is it's wrapped in an edit form this time, and we've got a data annotations validator. So in there, if we look in the shared library, I've got that person class there, and down here, there's another one, sorry. This one here, we've got that, and we've got that data annotations required attribute. So that's what's giving that behavior. And if I come in here and I select a valid value, you can see that I'm now, the type head's now applying modified and valid, again, in the same way that the Blazor form input components do. And at that point, you could submit the form. And if I go to my console, you can see that it's saying I've submitted my form successfully. So if you want to use Blazor Typeahead as part of one of your forms and you want to use it with validation, it will work exactly as you'd expect it to work if you're used to all of the other Blazor input components.
Nice. Yeah, and I'd used Blazor earlier on, and then I somehow missed a memo, and all of a sudden I was working more recently on forms and didn't realize how well, it's both complex, but it's also fully featured. All the form handling stuff is. There's all the form controls, and there's really rich support for like wrapping all the form elements. So
yeah, definitely. I mean, you've got a load of great components out of the box in input text area, input number, like all of the regular HTML stuff that you want to use. You've got a Blazor component equivalent out of the box, which is fantastic. What's really nice is you've then got input base, which you can then use to build customized components. That, you know, an input base is going to do all that heavy work for you of integrating with the edit context and dealing with the validation. All you've got to do is provide the particular piece of UI you want. But then in the case of like Blazor Typeahead, for example, we don't use input base. We go and manually integrate with edit context because, again, you can just pick up that cascaded value and you can integrate with the edit context directly and hook onto its events and all of this stuff. So, yeah, it's a great system. It really is a great system. I don't think I've tried to do anything yet. I've tried to do some fairly advanced stuff with forms. I don't think there's anything that I can't do with the mechanism, because if it doesn't do it out of the box, I can extend it, which I think is a good design. So yeah, that's really awesome. So I think that wraps us up for Typeahead. So the last one is Blazor Modal. So we'll go through that. So we'll swap over to that, and yeah. So before we get into like all the bits and bobs I want to show about Blazor Modal, I just want to say a big public thank you to a certain community member. So there's a chap called Lars Koopmans who's been really active on the Blazor Modal repo. He's always answering questions on issues. He's contributed a lot of code. It's actually recently become a maintainer on this particular repo. Actually, he puts a phenomenal amount of time into helping the community with solving problems and like I say, triaging issues. He's been a lifesaver for me as well, especially since I've been writing the book. I've had less time to do this stuff, and he's really picked up a lot of the slack. So I just want to take this opportunity to publicly say a very big thank you to Lars and all of the work he does. It's very much appreciated. So Blazor Modal. Blazor Modal, again, it's actually the second, I think it's the second favorite sort of most popular package in the Blazor set after local storage. And it's quite a simplistic principle, but I think people seem to find it quite useful. And what it does is it allows you to provide a component and it will just render it for you in a modal context. So we're going to take care of all of the heavy lifting of creating like a backdrop for you and positioning and all this kind of stuff. And you can just kind of give us a component and we'll just spit it out on the screen for you. So a basic usage example, if I click show modal, it just does what you'd expect from a modal. It's going to, create that nice sort of dark background, and it's going to just pop this up in the middle of the screen for you. And you can then just go ahead and close it. So if we go and have a quick look at the code and have a look at how that works. So what we've got here is a slightly different way of doing things compared to some of the other Blazor libraries we looked at today. We don't actually inject the service with Blazor Modal. We use a cascading parameter to deal with Blazor Modal. So if I go to the app.razor on this particular project, you can see that we have this cascading Blazor Modal component that wraps the router. What this does is it's going to first of all, it's going to cascade the iModal service down for all the components in the application. So you can just get it using cascading parameter instead of injecting it. But what it's also going to do is, in a similar way to Blazor Toast, it's going to actually create a little hook for us to inject the modal into the markup. And it does all of that under the hood. The reason we actually moved to using a cascading parameter for this was because it became a real sticking point for people getting the modal, the other Blazor modal. When you used to have to manually put the Blazor modal component in your markup, it mattered where it went, and people were constantly kind of hitting an error where it'd be in the wrong place, and it would create a weird render where the modal would be off to the side and all of your page would get shifted to the left or something like that. Or the other one was people were just forgetting to put it in. So what we've done is moved this cascading parameter value, and we can actually do some stuff to make sure that everything's there and everything is in the right place. So it's just a sort of a nicer experience from a user perspective. So that's what's going on there. So we're picking the iModal service up from this cascading parameter, and then we just have a method called .show. And all you do is pass to it a type argument. So here we're just passing the type of the parameter, the type of the component that we want it to display. So we're saying display the hello component, and the title for this particular modal is going to be welcome to Blazor modal. So the hello component is in here. It's just a bog standard component. There's nothing special about it. But what you can do again is you can use cascading parameters. Again, you can pick up this value called Blazor modal instance. And what this does is it gives you a hook into the actual modal that's rendering currently, and you can then control it from code yourself. So for example, here, we've got the button with close, and you can see here that what I'm doing is calling close async on that modal instance. So that will close that particular instance programmatically. To do that, I can return some information. So I can return a modal result. In this case, I'm just returning a Boolean. It doesn't matter what. And we'll go into that in a little bit more in a second. And that will just close the modal down. And that's it. That's all you've got to do. So you can display the modal, close the modal. So that's probably the most basic way of doing things. So there are lots of options that you can configure with Blazor modal. So for example, we have the background click. So at the moment, if I want to close the modal, I can do it by clicking either of the buttons, but I can also click anywhere on the background and it will disappear. But if I enable the background cancel mode, I can click as much as I want on this background and nothing happens. The only way of closing the modal now is via the buttons or the little X in the top corner. That's the only way I can close it. If you still don't want people to get to the X, you can go one step further. So we have the show close button at the top here, but you can hide that as well. So you can get rid of that. So if you want to force people to only use the buttons that you specify, you can do that by enabling or disabling the background click and disabling the close button. And then the only way they can get out is here. Again, position-wise, we'll take care of a load of this stuff for you. So by default, you can set the position to any of the sort of normal ones you'd want: top right, center, bottom left, bottom right. But you can also provide a CSS class that has a custom position as well. So if you do that, you can have it rendered wherever you want to. We can also do a bit of work to help you with scrollable content. So by default, the modal is just a container for your component. It has no sizing on it, for example. So it's going to render the component that you pass it in whatever size you give it. So if you give it a component that has a CSS style that says it's 300 pixels wide, the modal will be 300 pixels wide. There's no styling built in. There is a downside to this. If you give it a big component that's very long, you will get this. So it will go off the screen, top and bottom. Now, you can control that yourself by having an overflow scroll on your Y axis. I can never get them, X, Y. And you can configure that yourself. But if you don't want to do that, we can do that for you. So if you enable content scrollable, we'll actually get the viewport height. We'll take a little bit off of it. So you'll see we get a little bit of a buffer at the top and bottom. And then we'll basically enable the scroll for you. So if you don't want to do that, you know, if you're a lot of people I find are coming into Blazor from desktop development or sort of some older development background, and they're maybe not too happy to get into CSS just yet. That's a bit too much to take on at once. So we can sort of do a bit of work here and help you out with that. You can also, obviously by default, we'll show a header and you can pass a value, but you can also hide the header if you want to. So if you want a much more sort of cleaner looking, maybe like an informational dialogue to sort of say, I don't know, say you don't want to use Blazor Toast, you want something a bit more in your face, as it were, for saying that you've saved something or whatever, you could do it like this, remove the header and just have an OK button and just have the user acknowledge it that way. And you can also go completely custom. So you can tell us that you're going to provide all of the markup that's required to do the backdrop and everything. So you can really customize how it looks. If you do that, for example, you could do this. And this is now, while it looks very similar, the backdrop is actually slightly different. It's not quite as dark as the last one. And the style of the modal is slightly different. And that's because this is using all of the markup from Bootstrap. So this is using a complete Bootstrap styled modal. And there's no code, styling code anyway, from Blazed modal here at all. We're just doing the heavy lifting, like I say, of injecting that modal in the screen and rendering it however you give it to us. Another thing that I'll point out while we're here, because this is something that I wasn't as aware of coming into sort of open source and things, and certainly building these types of components for people, is accessibility. So someone brought up the fact that Blazed modal wasn't particularly accessible because we weren't using something called a focus trap. So when you open a modal with Blazed modal, by default, we enable a focus trap. And what that means is none of the background elements can be focusable. So if you start hitting tab, you can see at the moment the close button's got focus. You can see there's a little blue border. If I start tabbing, you'll see that I only have a tab between 3 controls. I'm going between the close, the cancel, and our close button. So if I'm a keyboard-only user, I cannot get lost. And what I mean by that is if you don't have a focus trap when you're doing something like a modal, if I hit tab, and I did it again here, instead of looping back round in the modal, it would disappear to the controls that are currently grayed out in the background, and I'd lose my focus for a period of time until it came all the way back around. It'd focus this cancelled enable button, which I shouldn't be able to click because there's something in the way of it. So it just helps with a bit of that. And we also have some ARIA attributes applied as well to, again, help with that. I'm certainly very much a novice when it comes to accessibility, and Lars has done some of the work with this. But we're trying to sort of get that stuff in there and make all of these components as friendly as possible for any type of user, basically. So that's kind of the modal options and some stuff you can figure. There's a few more niche bits, but I'll kind of skip those. If you want to see those, you can go on the repo and look at those bits. So to some more sort of scenario-based stuff. So we want to say if you want to pass some data to a modal, you can do that really easily. I can say hello and click show modal, and that will show me that message. So if I go over and look at this, what we're doing here is I've just got, again, a normal little input that I'm binding to. And when I click that show modal button, what we're going to do is create this object called modal parameters. So this is part of Blazed modal. We provide this. And what you can do is just add parameters that you want to pass up to the component that's being displayed. So these should mimic what's on your component. So what I'll do is I'll show you the component that's being displayed first. So this is what's showing that message that we just saw. And you can see it has a parameter like normal called message. And if we go back to the calling page, you can see that what I'm doing is using name of here to actually reference that parameter on that component. And then I'm passing the message up. And we're actually going to pass that value into that parameter in the same way that Blazor does normally, and allow that to use all of the normal Blazor infrastructure for doing parameter passing. So yes, you can basically just keep adding parameters for however many you need, and then you call modal.show, and this time around you just pass up that parameter, that modal parameters object, and that will just automatically pass those to the component that's being rendered. So that can be quite useful. Obviously, there's the other version of this, which is where you want to pass data back, and we kind of saw that a little bit earlier. So if I have a message and I want to pass that back and have it displayed, I can do that as well. So if I want to return data, we'll start with the components being displayed first of all. So that's just collecting that message. And then what I'm doing is when I'm hitting that close button, I'm going to pass back that message that's being bound. I'm going to do that inside of that modal result. Okay, so close async takes a modal result. You say it's okay, and then pass in the value you want to pass back. When we then go back to that page, there's a slightly different bit of code here now. So when we call modal.show this time, what you can do is you can actually get a reference back to the modal that you've just opened. So we pass that back from modal.show. And then with that, you can then await its result. So what's going to happen is when I click that show modal, we'll get that reference, then we'll await the result while the modal's active. When we pass back that modal result in here using that close async, that will return back that modal result object, and then we can check to see if it was cancelled. So if coming back here, we close the modal using the cancel async method, there's no value returned. So, the users click cancel instead of OK. So we can check for that. If that's not happened, then we can query a data object that's on that result. And we can say, OK, in this instance, I know I'm passing back a string. So I can just call toString. Otherwise, I'll just, render an empty string. So I can pass data objects, complex types, simple types, whatever you want. You can pass that back and do whatever you want with the modal. So again, that will be just quite useful in a lot of application scenarios. And the final one is probably the newest feature, which is the ability to have multiple modals show. So with this, you can show a modal, but you can also show another one. And we layer those for you. So what's happening now is modal 1 is awaiting the response of modal 2. And with that, you can just either close both of them in one go if you want to, or if you come back, you can close only modal 2, then you go back to modal 1 and you can shut that down. So very, very quickly, because I'm sure we're getting a little bit tight on time, we just call modal 1 like we were before. And in modal 1, when we click yes, and we come down here, we just call modal show again, and we show modal 2. And we keep a reference to that, and we just await the result of modal 2. And if that was cancelled, we return. Otherwise, we close everything entirely. So you can layer as many modals as you want. You can have 3, 4, 5, whatever you want to do, and we'll maintain those for you. So I think that's it. I'm done. I appreciate I've been talking for a very long time.
No, that was awesome, Chris. And I really appreciated the fact that you brought up accessibility as something that the components address, because that's a really important detail. And it's great to know that you're keeping it in mind.
Yeah, it's nice there too, because that's, sometimes when you look at this, the temptation is to think, oh, I could make a modal. Like, how hard could that be? But the problem is the things like the edge cases and the, handling focus and handling accessibility and handling all those things that you don't normally get to if you're building everything from scratch. So that's a really nice that you're working on all these components at that level, and have multiple people contributing to them and testing them is really, really great.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I just want to say a big thank you to anybody who's ever contributed to any of the Blazed repos over the past couple of years. It's been appreciated. Every PR, every issue, it really is appreciated. And thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. So I wanted to send you off with one last question that someone actually posted in the chat earlier, but I'm not able to find it right now, which is, you've been spending a lot of time working in the Blazor ecosystem. What are your favorite upcoming features in Blazor, or things that you would like to see happen in the ecosystem?
Oh, that is a tough question.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be honest, I'm going to go for the really obvious one, which is the developer loop. I cannot wait for hot reload. I'd love to know how many minutes I've spent of my life building Blazor apps each time and refreshing. So that, I think, for me is the big one. I'll be honest, it's become muscle memory, but it is definitely going to be a big win when that comes. And I think from a lot of people I speak to in the community, I think that is a big one from the community as well. Definitely. I'm also, and this is more of, because I'm just intrigued of the technicalities of it, is AOT. And how that's going to work, because obviously AOT's trade-off being we have bigger binaries, but better performance. So there's like a mixed mode is needed, and how the developer experience will be deciding what gets compiled and what doesn't, and how it actually happens. So that's more of a technical thing. I'm just intrigued by that. So I'm like watching the source code like a hawk for types of things. I'm stalking the Blazor source code on a regular basis. So yeah, but those two, I think, really for me.
Awesome. Yeah. I definitely things that a lot of folks in the community are curious about. And your approach of stalking the repo, so to speak, is a great way to stay up to date on what's happening there, because we've got issues open and you can see code changes happening on things. So pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Chris. It was really wonderful to have you on and share everything that you and the community have been doing with Blazor. Thanks for everyone who tuned in live, and thanks also to those of you who are watching the stream afterwards. Hopefully you enjoyed everything that was shared today, and I look forward to seeing you next month for our next edition of the Blazor Community Stand-Up. Until then, goodbye. Bye, folks.
Thanks.
Cheers, everyone. Bye.